Hello, everyone. Thanks you for joining me for this webinar. Hope you're all doing exceptional today. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Mike O'Quinn. I'm the VP of Product Management here at Astera Software. Part of my job is to look after our customers and their experience with the product after we've done a deployment. For those of you familiar with Astera, you'll probably undoubtedly know me from our support organization. I lead that effort. And that support organization is something that we're all very proud of. I also perform user trainings as well as evangelize the product, including doing webinars like this one. And I have to say that I'm very, very excited about this release. We've made a ton of changes and improvements, and we think that you'll appreciate a lot of these as well. We've received a lot of feedback from our customers over the years, and a lot of that feedback has to do with the interoperability of third-party services and runtime/deployment. And I think you'll find that we've addressed both of those items in a big way in version 8. Okay, so first, before we get started, I'd just like to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So here's the agenda for our webinar. And we're going to first kind of discuss what is Centerprise, and then we'll move into what's new in version 8, including the REST-based architecture for our server, the exposure of the Centerprise web services as kind of a first-class object now, the lean CenterPrize Client, so this affects how you deploy Centerprise, the brand new security and access control for all of Centerprise, basically, how we've switched the .NET framework to .NET Core and what that means for deployments, including Dockers, and including basically being able to put this in the cloud somewhere, which is brand new in version 8. And then we'll switch to stuff that's not quite out yet, but has the deliverable date of sometime in the Q3 of this year, including localization, being able to have it in different languages, some improvements in the runtime monitoring of jobs, something very cool, which is the data virtualization module, and the API integration module as well. So being able to deploy flows of services and consume them other services using an API browser. So that's something that's coming a little bit later, but it's all kind of part of the Centerprise 8 release. Okay, and also and then finally we'll end with the Q&A session. I just wanted to discuss a little bit about that. So I can't hear you, so if you, but you can type your questions into there's a little box where you can type in questions. We have staff who are on this webinar as well. They'll be fielding these questions. I advise that you ask them as you kind of get them, because you might forget later. And also, we can have somebody clarify those questions so that when I get to the end, I'll understand what you're talking about. So we'll have about 10 minutes, time permitting, to go through those questions. Maybe longer, maybe less. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. And let's talk about first, what is Centerprise? So Centerprise is our end-to-end data integration software that allows you to do a number of different things. You can do data integration, data quality, data migration, data transformation, and then application integration. You can connect to a variety of different data sources, such as traditional databases like MySQL, Oracle, DB2, SQL Server, Teradata, and Netezza. You can connect to cloud solutions such as Dynamics CRM, Salesforce, SAP, and now Power BI and Tableau. Web services such as popular web services, from Google, Amazon, etc., or just any web service that follows a REST-based architecture. And then, of course, we support files such as delimited Excel, structured and semi-structured, and unstructured files. So the ability to extract, transform, and load is a key part of our component of our application. And for those of you who are kind of new to Centerprise, I'll do a brief demonstration to kind of just show you what we're talking about. I don't want to just show the new features. I just kind of want to get you a feel for what Centerprise is in general. So I'm going to go ahead. So during this demonstration, I'll be kind of switching between the PowerPoint and a live demonstration of the product. So let's go ahead and switch screens here. Okay, so what you're looking at is the client. It's the Centerprise Data Integrator, or part of it anyway. It's the client portion of it. So the way it works is that you have a client installed on your desktop. You then create what we call data flows, which enable you to extract data from sources, run them through some transformations, and then deposit them in targets. You create multiple flows and they become part of a project. And the idea being is you create these data projects and you can have people who are maybe not necessarily coders, but maybe business analysts. They can get a hold of this tool and they can do things such as build a flow like this and end up with a very sophisticated data application project. Okay, so let's say, for example, I need to add some data quality checks to this flow, or I'm taking data from an Excel file, changing the name, running it through a lookup for translation, sorting it, and then inserting it into a database where you can see the schema is a little bit different. So I have to map, for example, English product name to product name. So I'm going to go here to my toolbox under data profiling, under data quality rules, and just add that in there. To add the rule, I just go to the properties, add my new rule, and say that the dealer price must be greater than 0. And my rule is going to be negative prices not allowed. And click OK. So now I've added a data quality check to this flow. I can now save it and now schedule this to run on an autonomously. But I might need more to do than just run the flow. I might have to do some orchestration on top of that. So with that, we have the workflow component in Centerprise, which allows me to do things such as move files around, being able to then do the data load, which I just developed, right? That can be the next step in my orchestration. Then check to see if it passes the data quality check. If it does, move it to my finished bucket. If not, move it to my rejected bucket and then send out an email notification. So this becomes my atomic unit of operations. It's my job. And now I can have this be scheduled on the server. So I can go to the server, go to job schedules, and then schedule this to run on a periodic basis, either on demand or on a temporal basis. So I can come here to the scheduler, go to the file path, and then decide when I want to schedule these things, whether they be daily, once, hourly, weekly, monthly, when a file drops, continuous, or on a submission basis. So with this, now I can save it and then see the jobs that I've run in the past and all the details about that. The data flow allows me to translate and transform all of the data using a variety of different transformations, including I can do things such as very quickly manipulate data values using the expression language. So this is a very simple expression language akin to Excel. And it's very easy to pick up, very easy to use. And then I can also translate, transform entire data sets using things such as merge, reconcile, pass-throughs, apply to all, etc. So once I have that, I can deploy it, save it, and then run it on an ongoing basis. And that's pretty much what Centerprise does. So that brings us to version 8. So that what I showed you is basically all that's been there since version 5. In version 8, this is kind of a big release for us at Astera. It's been in the works for about a year now. And what's new in the improvements is that the features are here and there. We've changed some features here and there. But the biggest change, I would say, is that the introduction of the REST-based server architecture. So we've completely revamped the CenterPrize server for enhanced flexibility and security, and scalability, I mean, also security. So now it's based on a HTTP calls from the client to the server. And this has a variety of different impacts, which I'll get to in a little bit. But the biggest thing is it enables platform-independent communication between the client and the server. So I can have my client on Windows, I can have my server on Linux, for example. We'll get to that in a bit. And I can manage all of my jobs, schedules, and other operations through these APIs. So here's a diagram of kind of what I'm talking about. So we have our Windows client, which I just showed you, which is communicating to the server via the CenterPrize REST APIs. And then we have all of the functionality of the server, which sits behind those REST APIs, including the job manager, the security manager, the scheduler, the virtual database, which I'll get to, and the database agent, etc. So in version 7, this was all hidden behind technology called .NET Remoting. It was basically a technology that only the CenterPrize client could access the server, or you can write your own .NET application using the Astera SDKs and access the server that way. But with this new architecture, now this chunk here from the blue part down is exposed through the REST, and you can access them directly through your own applications. So this enabled us to create a lean version of the CenterPrize client. So the CenterPrize client no longer had to be this thick application, which took some time to deploy. Maybe you had to jump through hoops to get it deployed. It allows now for cross-platform compatibility. So either Mac OS or Linux, anything that supports .NET Core, you can install the server on now. And also you can deploy this on a remote machine, including machines that you rent from Amazon or Google or at Microsoft, etc. And now we also have support for Docker deployment containers, which I'll get to in a little bit when we talk about deployments. But all of these things are capable with the new, because of the CenterPrize web services. So before we had APIs, which were, like I said, .NET Remoting. But now this has become a first-class part of the product, the focus of CenterPrize version 8. And it means that you can deploy this on Windows, Linux, in the public cloud, private cloud, any machine that you can have access to via HTTP or HTTPS, more likely. Then you can access the CenterPrize server. It doesn't have to be on the same network anymore. So this means that you can access a wide variety of functions from the CenterPrize server using these APIs, aforementioned APIs. So the possibilities to integrate with all of your other applications have significantly raised now. So whereas before you had to, you had to develop an application or maybe use the command line in order to access the functionality of the server, well, now you can just make a REST service call to be able to do the same thing. And we have a whole ton of things that you can do now. So for example, let me show you kind of an automated documentation page, which shows all of the APIs that we have available here. So you can see that there's quite a few different categories. The main one that you're probably familiar with is the server APIs. These are things that you can do with the server, but you can see that there's a ton of other things, including authentication, authorization, and database accessibility. So here you can see that they're very clean, clear APIs. You just go to the URL, API/jobs, and you're going to get this JSON object back. So this enables a developer who may be not familiar with CenterPrize. You just say, hey, here's the API, here's the documentation for it, and you can immediately start interacting with CenterPrize, even if they're not part of that group. And again, we have these APIs categorized, very organized fashion, including the account section, account category, which basically just contains information for who the users are, roles, etc. The server category, including job monitoring, schedules, server manipulation, and virtual data models. The ADM Astera data model allows you can control that with the server as well, and I'll get to that in a bit. DB agent for controlling access, reading, and writing from databases. You can do that directly through the Centerprise Web Services. And then finally, authorization. This is the service that you normally have to call in order to call all these other services. You'll have to get your access. So this categorization also has a benefit that I can secure these services at different levels, right? So I might have somebody who has access to the DB agent and the data models, who's a developer within Centerprise, but maybe the administrator only has access to be able to manipulate the job information, or even just view read-only job information. So if I have my own application that needs to access Centerprise, I can grant that access to that application without having to access the other parts of the system. Okay, which leads us to the lean Centerprise client, because now the server is kind of doing everything now, including authentication and just passing along information to the client. The client is substantially smaller. It's a lightweight version of the Centerprise that you know and love, but it works on the REST server architecture. So there's no need to install database drivers and add-ons every time you have a new machine. You can have just a simple install, and the only requirement is that it still has .NET framework required for the client. But other than that, you don't have to worry about the custom plugins being installed. You don't have to worry about the drivers being installed, etc. So, for example, let's take a look at the size of the client. So I took these screenshots of, this is the latest version that we have available on our website, 7.5, and it clocks in at about 160 megabytes. And then the new version clocks in at about a little over 30 megabytes. So, where did all that stuff go, right? So the answer is that what's happening is that the client now requires the server to do just about anything. So one of the first things you'll notice is that when you start up version 8, that you're required to log in. So you have to have connectivity to a server somewhere, and the server is going to be the one serving you. It's going to be relaying all the information to the client, whether that be a database call, custom function execution, anything that has any operation that you're doing in the Centerprise client is being done on the back end through the server. So the client has now delegated pretty much all of the responsibilities, and it's been it's a very simple, lightweight application. So let me just show you an example of what I'm talking about here. So let's go to the data source browser in the tool. And you can see here I've already connected to a database. And I'm connected here to a SQL Server, but this could easily be an Oracle or a DB2, in which case I would need the appropriate driver to be able to even see this information. Now with this thin client, I can just say, okay, connect to it, and I don't have to worry about those drivers. I can just say the server is going to give me this information and display it. So if I create a new data flow, go to the data source browser, drag and drop to object, and then preview, I can see this data set and work with the data set without having to actually have to access the database directly. So this means that I can have a layer between me and the database, including security features of what I can access and what I can't access. So the client is completely dependent on the server to do just about everything now. Everything's happening through the server, and meaning that everything is centralized on the server, the deployment of the client is much simpler. Okay, so to recap, the benefits of this new client-server communication model is that it's quicker and easier to deploy Centerprise. I don't have to worry about those drivers, those hoops, those environment gotchas that you might have run into with the Centerprise deployments before. It reduces the IT burden for having to maintain these deployments. So it's much easier to maintain, including that there's fewer upgrades for the client. So if I have, let's say you have there was some bug fix or some update to the product, most likely you don't have to update the client. You can just update the server, and because the client is getting all the information from the server, the client version is kind of irrelevant at this point. There's also a centralized security model which benefits. So I don't have to set up the client and say, okay, this client is set up for this person, therefore they have that license, etc. Now all of the security is handled through the server. So you log into the server with your username and password, and then the server, you can, maybe you have one person who's configuring the roles for that particular user. That person grants the users the appropriate security to access whatever they need to for that particular client. So again, you don't have to do this on a client by client basis. You can just do it one place on the server, give them the URL to download the client. They download it in a few minutes, and it's already configured for them. Okay, so speaking of security, we have a new security mechanism for Centerprise. So in version 7, if you've ever worked with the cluster settings of it, you basically had a single screen where you can handle user access. And this is basically all or nothing, because either you enabled enabled access for everyone, or you locked it down based on users and groups, but either they were an admin or they can do a few things, view jobs, etc. With the new security model, we now have access to, since everything's going through a REST API, now we're locking down those APIs, and that's kind of what we are controlling the security on. So it's much finer grain level of security, and it's based on roles and super users. It's a token-based authentication for application access, meaning that the first thing that Centerprise does is it logs into the authentication server, gets a token, an access token, and then uses that token on every single operation going forward. And this is the exact same thing that third-party application might do. So if you have an application needs to access Centerprise, it's going to work the same way. You're going to get your token, you're going to get access based on whoever set that up, and then use that token to access the rest of the functionality of Centerprise web services. So this means that we also have SSL configuration now. So now you can don't have to worry about the communication from your client to the server. Everything is being encrypted via SSL and the HTTPS protocols. We've now introduced role-based access. Again, before we just had the user and user groups, and you had to individually configure what they can do, and it wasn't much, right? They could either run a job or view a job. Now we have much finer grain access, and that's through our role-based mechanism. So it's an intuitive list. Administrators can easily register new accounts, and then we have a lot of defaults to help you along the way. You don't have to set everything up from scratch. So this is the new screen that you're presented with when you log into, when you try and start Centerprise version 8. You have the, your username, typically an email address, and then your password. You click the login, and then you're granted access. So this is something new in version 8. We now have a centralized user management location screen. So you can create and deactivate users in just a couple of clicks, and you can add and remove them to different roles and very easily as well. So here you can see that this admin is part of the root role, Amanda Bates is part of the operator role, this account's active, they're all active. This user is not active, and this one is active. So I can very easily maintain my user management on this screen. And again, because of the way the thin client or the lean client is set up, I don't have to go through that setup on the client. I just do it here in one spot. Client immediately reflects whatever I've set here. The roles now, a lot of these are the default roles: developer, operator, and root. And I can also add my own custom roles. So these roles make it so that I don't have to define that fine-grain access for every single user. I can just say, okay, this is the role, and we have typical roles in mind, like a developer. somebody's working with Centerprise. The root, which is the super user, this might be one person who just sets it up. And then the operator might be the person who is monitoring job information, making sure that jobs are running when they're supposed to be running. And if that's not enough, I need to make a custom role or edit these. I can do so on using the access control screen. So all the ones in red here are the ones where they don't have access. The ones that are in green, they do have access. And I can say that deployment, yes, they have permission for that. The scheduler, the log, the explorer, deployment. So this is a typical person who might be just interested in the operational side of Centerprise, not the development side. So they don't have to have access to Centerprise, and they can't preview, they can't see the functions, they can't do pretty much anything other than those few screens here. So I can get as granular as I want, or I can just rely on the default roles that you saw earlier. Okay. Another big change in version 8 is the technology that we've used to build the product. So before, where we've used the .NET framework, starting from 2.0, I think, or whatever the earliest one was for Centerprise, all the way through 4.7. This has meant that Centerprise has been a Windows-only application. We've now changed this to, we're fully on board the .NET Core train, and now you can see that this means that we can support Linux and Mac OS as well as Windows. So the cross-platform support enables for more choices. So if you have, let's say, a situation where you want to expand Centerprise, but you don't want to pay for the licensing of a Windows server along with the Microsoft SQL Server, those can get pretty expensive. You might want to consider having Centerprise sit on a Linux server and maybe talking to a Postgres repository. So this means that you can install this on Ubuntu, CentOS, whatever distribution of Linux. Those are the ones that we've been testing on so far. And it allows for slightly actually improved query execution time, not query execution time, but job execution time and performance, just because of the lower overhead of Linux. So it's a simple deployment, just a script, and you can get going on Linux just as easily as you could on Windows. We also have support for Dockers. So this means that if you're not familiar with Dockers, it's kind of like a virtual machine. But whereas a virtual machine is kind of a divvied up portion of that host operating system, the Docker sits on a Docker application, and you kind of have these images on top of it, which shares the same resources. So what that means for Centerprise is that you can easily scale deployments very quickly with just a couple of commands. So this means that if I want to have multiple Centerprise servers sitting side by side to increase throughput, I don't have to rent multiple virtual machines as you did in version 7. I can now just have a Docker on a single machine and have multiple instances of that environment. So this improves scalability. It also improves deployment. So the deployment is very simple. I don't have to go through and worry about an environment being different than the one that is here at Astera. It works here, it doesn't work there, because the environment actually comes with that container. So the container is completely self-contained. All the file system, all the environment, all the drivers, everything that's needed for that particular server is already part of that container. So that's not specific to Centerprise, that's just Docker in general, but Centerprise now has support for it. So, for example, let's take a little example here just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So here I have a PuTTY client where I've logged into a remote machine, which is a Linux machine, and I'm just going to type in Docker PS, which has here, you can see that I have two instances, Docker container 1, container 2, up and running. They've been up for 9 hours. So if I want to increase my throughput, right, so I have another license of the Centerprise server, I'm just going to go here and enter one of these commands. There we go. Let's go start instead of stop. And now if I check to see what I got, I now have 3 instances of the server up and running. So all of the load balancing is automatically, because I'm now have that all those servers connected to the same repository. It's already been pre-configured. I now have the benefit of the load balancing and failover without having to do much of anything else. And if I need to spin them down, I can just call the stop command. So Docker deployment is much easier and allows for a much better scalability, in our opinion. So it's something we're pretty excited about, taking the technology that's kind of becoming more and more popular, and we're happy to be on board there. Okay. This also means that you can deploy Centerprise on a remote machine. So there's a ton of infrastructure as a service providers now. So we've had this question come up quite a bit over the years. Can you deploy Centerprise on an Amazon machine? And the answer has been yes, but it's a little tricky. You kind of had to do some hacks to get it to work, some security things you had to set up. So now the answer is an emphatic yes. You can have Centerprise on one of those platforms, the server on there. You can have the client on your desktop at your workstation. So now it's all happening again via HTTP REST calls. Those ports are typically open and secured through SSL. You don't have to worry about that. And you can take advantage of maybe a Centerprise server in the cloud and maybe a file system, Azure Files or Amazon S3. And then now you kind of have a cloud solution where everything is being processed remotely, not on-premise anymore. So a lot of companies, that's where things are going. And now Centerprise can be a part of that story. Here's some examples of supported infrastructure as a service platforms: Amazon, AWS, Azure, Google, etc., Cloud Rackspace, all the popular ones. Amazon, we've tested Centerprise in these environments, and they work just great. Okay, so that's pretty much it for what's new in Centerprise for this version that you can download right now. There's also a version coming out in the Q3 of 2019. So this is stuff right around the corner we're currently working on. We're also very excited about. I'm going to start off with foreign languages. So foreign languages, we are been primarily a US-based company, and all of our customers need to at least speak some level of English. We do have some customers in Germany and France and Spanish-speaking countries, and now we've introduced the ability to have the application reflect that. So the help, the menus, all of that can now be translated into these languages. We're going to start with Spanish, French, and German, but we hope to have, I think, around 8 languages by sometime next year. So again, this is something that is coming out in Q3 of 2019. We've also made some improvements to server monitoring and job management, including being able to generate diagnostics information on demand. We have a unified server management interface to see a single view of all the servers connected to the repository. If you want to see aggregate information, statistics about jobs, we have that coming. How much processing power, what the job queue, what the server usage looks like. We've also made changes to the existing server monitor list. So this is something that's been asked for a long time, and now we've gotten around to it. So if you're familiar with the old job monitor list, you probably had some requests from it as well. and we've heard you, and we've introduced those in this next version, including being able to do a custom date range, right? So before you could just do last week, the week, last month, within the last year, etc., last 7 days. Well, now you can just pick your date range. So this is something that's been asked for quite a bit, and now we have it. You can now filter, right, jobs that have only read data. So in a situation where you have jobs that are repeating over and over again, a lot of times, if this applies to you, you might have a bunch here, then most of these are 0. Now I can filter them out to say, okay, only show me records, only show me jobs that have actually read anything. So if I have a continuous job schedule, for example, and it's checking data service, or it's checking for the existence of a file, and most of the time it hasn't actually done anything, those jobs can be filtered out. We've also added an advanced search. So I can do more than one thing. I can search for search for jobs that have happened this week. I can search for my jobs, only data flows, a certain running status, etc. I can save that advanced search, and the next time I go to this screen, that search will be applied. So I don't have to keep entering the same information over and over again. We've also introduced improvements to being able to view root jobs only. So you've probably seen this situation where I have a parent job, in this case, my job orchestration, which then calls a data flow, but I might even have a workflow which calls another workflow, which calls another workflow, which in turn calls a data flow. So it shows up as multiple entries in the list, but I might be interested in only seeing it as just the top level thing. So we've introduced that filter as well. So now you can filter that out and just see the top level jobs, i.e. ones with no parent. Okay, so that's coming again in Q3 of 2019. And this is the big one. So this is right around the corner, and it is our new data virtualization module. So it allows me to accelerate the results of data integration tasks without moving data from the primary location. So what does that mean? So that means that I can just put a virtual layer on top of a database, a file, web services, basically anything, and consume that as if it were a database. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a demonstration to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to switch screens here. And what you're looking at here, this is a version of that module coming out in Q3, and you're looking at what we call a data model. So the data model contains a few objects here on it, right? It contains an Excel file, right? And this is a list of customer transactions, and it contains a database table. So this is from a database, a table from a database called customer, and I've linked these two entities, a database table and a file, via the customer ID. All right, so I've created that relationship between the two. I've also added a subflow. So what is this thing here? So this is, and here are all the entities for this object, right? But it's neither a database nor a file. It is actually a Centerprise object, which means that I can use subflows such as this one, right, where I've taken two entities, did a join, filtered the data, maybe did some other transformation, set an output, and now I can use this in the model itself. So meaning that anything that I can do in a data flow, I can throw it in a subflow, and I can put that output of that flow into my data model. So now I've basically virtualized all of the operations going on in this flow, and I've made it accessible to anybody who has this data model. So what does that mean by having a data model? Well, I can deploy it, and once I deploy it, I can see it now in my data source browser. So here's my data source browser, and here are several other models that I've deployed. And now all of the all of the entities in that model show up as if they were database tables in the browser. So I can do things such as display records, the schema, and then there's caching involved, which I'll get into a little bit. But it shows up to me, maybe somebody who's using a different project, as a database. So it's a virtual database that I can use in my projects. And I can control deployments such as, here you can see that my virtual model 4 or 3, I have the cache ready. If I want to see the cache details, I can click on this and it'll show me when the cache was last updated, right? Because you don't want to be doing this every time, all these operations, if a lot of times the information is not going to change. So I can see when the information has changed, how often it runs, see that it's active, and then make sure that the caching has been successful for the last 10 times. So now I've created my virtual model. I've done all the work as a developer in Centerprise, and now I have another team who wants this information, right? So they want the information of the customer transaction, the customer, and this customer category data subflow that had to go through some data transformations, quality, etc. So they want this information, but they're not necessarily part of this project that's developing it, right? They just want to consume it. So I might have another team using Centerprise. It might be an integration project. And sure, right? And then the first thing they're going to do is add a data flow, right? Because they know what data flows are. And somebody has already given them, as part of the project, these data sources, right? So they say, okay, here's your access to the database. It might be a shared action, whatnot. And now I can say, okay, I'm just going to use customer, and that's going to be my database. Or I'm going to use that customer category, and that's going to be my other database. So I don't have to know anything about what went on to make this data for me. I can just use it as a consumer of this, of somebody else's efforts. So this enables for a complete abstraction between two teams, and it enables a very healthy separation of concerns. So we think this is a very cool feature, very has a lot of use cases when you're talking about different teams, or even not even different teams, but let's say that you want to have security on this table. You don't want to have them accessing the database directly. Now with our new authentication module, I can now restrict access to what they can do on this database table. I don't have to go to the database directly. I can control all of that through the virtual data models. Okay. So again, key feature, I can use the MultiTable Query. So if you've ever used that tool in Centerprise version 7, that also applies to virtual data models. I can do referential integrity between two disparate objects. I can enforce that as well. And I can do caching on the data model. And this is important because it enables you to kind of use it as a database. You don't have to worry about, let's say, a web service taking 5 minutes to come back for a very long operation. I can have that run as part of the cache refresh, and then basically take advantage of that data. So this is something that we actually use internally here at Astera for different departments. We have a marketing department, we have our sales department, and they generate reports based on combined information from these data models that we've put together. So we've used it, we've been using it for a while. We're very happy with it. We're very excited for you to be able to see this and later on this year. Okay. So another huge feature coming out in Q3 is the API integration module. So just like you were seeing I'm going to switch screens here real quick. Just like you were seeing here in the data source browser, where I can add oops, the wrong screen, where I can add a virtual data model. We're going to have another screen similar to this data source browser. It's going to be our API browser. So the idea being is that you just point to an API that supports, let's say, Open API or some sort of Swagger definition, and all of those services will be listed for you to use here. So it's already pre-configured. If you've ever used our client, REST client before, you come here, go to the REST client, drag and drop, and then you configure it. Well, now you can just go say, okay, I want to hook up to that service. Specify the authentication, and now you can use that in your flows as if you were using databases. So all of this is kind of tightly integrated with the, you might have a project, and you can define those defaults at the project level. So you can easily consume services in that way using the browser. But you can also publish services. So just like we were looking at in the virtual data model, where you can have the subflow and let's go back here real quick again. Sorry, wrong screen. Just like we were looking at in the virtual data model with the project or the subflow, where I can expose this as a virtual item, I can also do that in this service-based component that we're talking about. So now I can publish APIs to external and internal users. Let's say I have departments that I need to access, information that's being created from Centerprise. I can basically have a data flow and treat that as a web service. So this becomes now a transactional processing as opposed to the traditional batch processing that you're used to. And I can publish the data as OData or a REST API or virtual database. So the virtual data model and the publishing of Centerprise flows as a service are kind of two sides of the same coin. So I have the use case of somebody being able to consume this with a database and somebody being able to consume this with a service. And the service orchestration, all the workflow and all that stuff, and then connectivity across APIs in a unified visual drag and drop interface, which means that I can mix and match services, right? So if I have my on-premise data, which might be in a database somewhere, and I need to enrich that data with a service, and then I want to turn around and expose that enriched data as a web service to, let's say, internal departments or external customers or clients, I can do that with this new module, coming in Q3. Okay. So, and I can secure all of these APIs, just like we've been showed you with our authentication module. I can secure right down to the operations. Let's say they have access to gets, but not puts or post. I can do that with our authentication module and weave that into the API. I can monitor the API usage, so I can see how many people are hitting my services at this data flow as a service. And I can automatically create documentation, kind of like what you've seen in that other, that colorful screen where I showed you the APIs. So this is, again, coming in Q3, and this has the features of the developer portal. So I can control all of these things in one spot. Much like our server monitor, I can control all of the server operations in one spot. I can now control all of the API ins and outs in one spot. We have a capability to be able to automatically test these APIs, right? You're building APIs, you need some way to test it. That'll also be part of this module. Versioning is very important. So to be able to say, here's my version 1 of this API, here's my version 2, and have them both be supported at the same time. And of course, security and operation and analytics. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take questions and answers. And I haven't been paying attention to I've been hearing all these things, but I haven't been seeing them. So let's go up the list here. And let's say, so the first question, is it possible to put an annotation note on a DF or workflow? That is something that is kind of a work item. I don't know in which version that is coming out in, but yes, we do have development underway to put an annotation in a data flow or workflow. I don't know the status of it though. Number 2, is it possible to set breakpoints on both data flow and workflow task and debug the step through an app? No, so that you cannot do in Centerprise. It doesn't connect to like Visual Studio or something like that. What we do have the data preview, which kind of acts as a debugging tool. So I can preview a data source and let's say see the first 50 records or the first 10 records. And if I create enough columns, let's say an expression that's relating to another column, that's kind of how we do our debugging. And then in workflow, you can run individual actions in that workflow. But to answer your question, no, you cannot hook up breakpoints in the workflow at this point. Okay, another question. Does version 8 have a capability to encrypt the config file or parameters at the server level? We are especially interested in ID password maintenance. So the config file can be encrypted at the server level. I don't believe it's encrypted at the client level when you're developing the tool, but that's something that we can take back with us and say, you know what, before we can add this in the next iteration. So again, you can encrypt the config file at the server level when you deploy the projects, but while you're developing, I don't know if they're encrypted or not. So, but if not, we can probably add that. Okay, are there role-based activities logged in Centerprise? I don't kind of understand what you mean here. Are the role-based activities, okay, meaning that you've changed a role from one to another? I don't believe so, that they're logged, but that's a good idea, right? So we've changed, well, actually, you know what, they are logged. I take that back, because we have the server event, and so this is an event that's happening. So I've changed the role from one to another, and it's going to show up in the event log. Now, keep in mind that the event log is purged by default after 7 days, but you can change that to whatever time limit you want, and then you can archive that, let's say, on another database. So I take that back. These are logged, but they are logged not specifically. They're logged just in general, along with everything else that's happening on the Centerprise server. Okay, next question is, will these slides be available to attendees, or was this video be placed on the Estero website? Usually that's what we do. Yeah, we usually just have a video of the recording, and I could see that it's already been recorded for you. Yeah, so once we're done with this, we'll put it up on the website, and you can go back and look at it. So the Centerprise for Docker containers, does that include the server piece? Well, that is pretty much what we had in mind for the Docker containers. That we would have a version of Centerprise in a container that you can put on a Docker container host. So that, yeah, so I think the answer is yes. Is this webinar focused only on the Centerprise server edition? Well, the server has kind of been the focus of version 8 and how it changes the communication between the client and the server. So the client is now much smaller, much easier to install, but the server is doing much of the work now. So it applies. The webinar applies to both, but and maybe I answered these in the wrong order, it looks like. Yes, so this webinar was for both the server and the client. Okay, so those are kind of all the questions that have already been asked. Are there any other questions that that you might have for me to take on, and I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, so going once, going twice. Okay, then if there's no further questions, I thank you all for attending. Hopefully, oh, hold on, wait. How easy or difficult to move from 7.5 to version 8? Well, this is going to be a pretty big change for how the version 7 works from version 8. But the good news is that all of the flows, all of the transformations, all of the work that you've done in version 7 is pretty much, it will work in version 8 with no changes, that's all. So it's completely backwards compatible in that regards. So the only change is going to be how the client communicates to the server. So once you install version 8, it should be pretty easy from the client point of view, right? Because the client is actually made much easier. So the upgrade for the client is actually much easier from going from 7 to 8. So we've done this. It's a side-by-side install, so it doesn't overwrite version 7. You can run version 7 right alongside version 8 to try it out if you want. Can more examples of how to use dollar variables be provided? With the documentation of the related functions, I know how to use the set variable, but not others. So yeah, we can, if you reach out to us, I think that's kind of out of the scope of this webinar, but you can reach out for us and we can set up a session or point you to some documentation for how to use these variables. The variables are very important in version 8 and version 7 as well, but deployment was kind of a big topic in version 7 and 8. So are there any enhancements to the push-down mode in version 8? Yes, there have been some enhancements to push-down mode in version 8, as well as overall performance enhancements in version 8. So not only push-down, but also ETL in general has been improved quite substantially. So we've taken a look at one of the comments that we've frequently gotten back from customers is that, hey, I have this Centerprise on a pretty beefy machine. I see, it's got 32 gigs of RAM on it, and you're using like 300. Like, how can I get it to use more? Well, that's something that we're addressing in version 8 as well. So now we'll just totally let you control how much of the server you're using, and therefore drastically decrease the running times in version 8. Where is the virtual database hosted? Is it in memory? The virtual database is hosted in a combination of on memory and on disk. So much like the server is serving up data, it's also going to be serving up data via this virtual database. So in Centerprise, when you hook up to it, to the virtual database, it is on the CenterPrize server. And again, it's in memory combination with on persisted disk. Okay. And just going back to, I think it was Kevin, can more examples be used? The variables, we'll reach out to you and we'll set something up to kind of show you how to use variables. Any other questions regarding Centerprise version 8 or Centerprise in general? Okay, going once, going twice. And there's no other questions. So again, I thank all of you for attending the webinar, and hope this has been informative. And again, if you want to download version 8 right now, you can go to our website, and we'll put some information on our homepage where you can easily download the version 8. So just got to fill out your name and email, and then it'll give you the link to the download. So everything I showed you, aside from the virtual data model and the stuff coming in Q3, is there for you to kind of play around with and give us your feedback on how you feel this version 8 stacks up to version 7, etc. So yeah, thank you for attending, and it's been my pleasure. Thank you.